What if I told you that some of the people you pass by every day, at the grocery store, on the train, in your own family, aren't truly alive inside? That behind some of those familiar eyes lies no presence, no higher awareness, no soul? It sounds like a science fiction tale, or maybe the whispered madness of some forgotten mystic. But what if it's neither? What if this is the truth hidden just beyond the veil of ordinary perception? A truth ancient teachers once risked everything to reveal. A truth that modern society laughs off precisely because it's so dangerously real. Pause for a moment and really ask yourself this. How many people have you met who feel empty? Not just lost or confused, but hollow, like something essential is missing. Maybe you've noticed the blankness in their stare, the absence of moral compass in their choices, the mechanical repetition of words that sound like emotion but carry none of its energy. Maybe, even now, your memory is pulling up someone whose presence felt off, like they were acting human rather than being human. You couldn't quite explain it, and so you let it go. But what if you shouldn't have? There is a secret that has echoed through the halls of mystery schools, passed from teacher to student in hushed tones, carried across centuries like a forbidden flame. And the secret is this: not everyone you meet has a soul. That's not a metaphor. It's not poetry. It's not a judgment. It's a terrifying, liberating, worldview-shattering truth that will either awaken you or leave you clinging to a lie. Throughout time, mystics, sages, and spiritual rebels have warned us that humanity is not as uniform as it appears. Behind the shared appearance of eyes, skin, and language, there exists a hidden divide, a separation not of race, or status, or intellect, but of spiritual origin. Some are born carrying the divine spark, the inner light that connects them to Source. Others are born without it, or worse, they had it once, and lost it. And once lost, it rarely returns. This isn't a modern conspiracy theory, it's an ancient spiritual knowing. Gnostics in the early centuries of the Common Era warned of it. Hermetic initiates hinted at it. Eastern mystics alluded to it in parables. And in the more esoteric corners of Western occultism, the concept was spoken of not with hatred, but with pity, and with caution. The term soulless doesn't refer to a person's morals or their kindness. Some of the most charming people you meet may fall into this category. Rather, it points to a deeper reality, whether or not someone is anchored to a living connection with the divine. You may be wondering, how can someone appear human and not possess a soul? Isn't the soul the very essence of what it means to be human? That's what we've been taught. That we all start with the same tools, the same potential, the same access to the divine. But the mystics saw something different. They saw that form is not proof of essence. That wearing a human body doesn't guarantee spiritual awareness, any more than sitting in a temple guarantees enlightenment. Consciousness is not distributed evenly, and that is not a flaw in the system. It is part of the design. Some traditions spoke of these soulless beings as shells, vessels that operate through instinct, social conditioning, and imitation, but lack the capacity for true self-awareness or spiritual growth. Others believed that these shells could be occupied, used by external forces to influence the world of form without being bound to it. But more often than not, these beings operate without possession. They are just vacant, animated by biological function and mental patterning, but devoid of the sacred flame that makes us truly alive. This isn't about superiority. It's not about being better or worse. In fact, it's one of the most humbling realizations you can encounter. Because the moment you accept that not everyone has a soul, you also have to accept that the soul you carry is not guaranteed. It must be guarded, nurtured, remembered. Ignored too long, and even the divine spark within you can dim to nothing. Ask yourself, when was the last time you felt yourself glowing with that inner light? When was the last time you sat in stillness and sensed the undeniable presence of your own being? Can you tell the difference between your soul's voice and your mind's noise? If not, the line between the living and the hollow may be thinner than you think. Those who warned us of this truth did not do so lightly. In ancient texts, there were always layers of meaning, outer teachings for the masses, inner teachings for the initiates. Why? Because the full truth would shake the world's foundations. If the average person knew that some of their leaders, their lovers, their co-workers, were simply shells moving through a dream, the illusion of civilization would crumble. The myth that everyone is on the same path, just at different speeds, would be exposed. And with that, the deepest fear would emerge. Maybe I'm not as awake as I thought I was. That's the real threat of this idea. Not that others are soulless, but that you might be drifting into that state yourself without realizing it. That every moment of unconsciousness, every sacrifice of intuition for comfort, every act of self-betrayal is a step toward hollowness. The soul doesn't scream when it fades. It whispers less and less until all you hear is silence, and mistake it for peace. This truth isn't comfortable. It's not popular. It won't trend, but it is sacred. And if you're still listening, if something inside you is burning with the question, could this be true, then your soul is still alive, still reaching, still whispering, and that means there's hope. The mystics never shared this to create paranoia. They shared it to ignite discernment, to pull back the curtain of assumptions and show us what's really at stake. Not your job, not your image, but your essence, your connection to the eternal, your place in the greater mystery of existence. So the next time you look into someone's eyes, pause, feel. Don't judge, but don't assume, either. Because behind every human face is either a divine spark shining through, or a mask, worn by something that no longer remembers what light feels like. And the deeper question remains, which are you becoming? Have you ever met someone who felt like an enigma wrapped in flesh? Someone whose presence seemed to carry an energy that couldn't be measured by intellect or explained away by science? If so, then you've touched the edge of the kind of mystery Helena Petrovna Blavatsky lived and breathed. Born in 1831 in what is now Ukraine, she was not just ahead of her time, she seemed to exist entirely outside of it. Her life reads less like a biography, and more like the journey of a soul tasked with delivering unsettling truths to a world too preoccupied with appearances to understand what lies beneath. From the beginning, Blavatsky was marked by a spiritual restlessness that could not be confined by polite society or the expectations placed on women of her era. As a young girl, she reportedly displayed uncanny psychic abilities. Visions, apparitions, and strange dreams were part of her everyday reality. But instead of silencing these experiences, she followed them like clues left by some invisible hand. Driven by an insatiable hunger for hidden knowledge, she left her privileged home and embarked on a journey that would take her across the globe in search of answers most people didn't even know they should be asking. India, Tibet, Egypt, Europe. These weren't just destinations on a map for her, they were gateways into forgotten wisdom and the mysteries of existence. Along the way, she studied under mystics, sages, and spiritual adepts from traditions both known and hidden. She didn't merely dabble in spiritual philosophy, she immersed herself in it, absorbing the wisdom of the East while simultaneously confronting the blind materialism of the West. Through this fusion, something unprecedented was born. In 1831, she co-founded the Theosophical Society in New York City. It wasn't a religious institution, it was a spiritual revolution. Its core mission was threefold: to form a nucleus of universal brotherhood without distinction, to encourage the comparative study of religion, philosophy, and science, and to investigate the unexplained laws of nature and the latent powers within the human being. The Society's goals were noble, but its impact was volcanic. In a time when dogma ruled and questions were discouraged, Blavatsky opened a doorway into forbidden terrain, one where ancient teachings, occult truths, and spiritual science could coexist. But it wasn't just her teachings that shook the foundations of conventional thinking. It was her unflinching audacity to say what others feared to whisper. She published works that became the backbone of Western esotericism, most notably The Secret Doctrine, a dense and provocative text that merged Eastern mysticism, Kabbalistic symbols, and metaphysical science into a unified spiritual framework. It was in this work that she introduced one of her most haunting ideas: that not all human beings are truly ensouled. Some, she claimed, were walking, talking vessels, biological forms animated by something other than a divine essence. To understand how radical this was, you have to put yourself in the mindset of the 19th century world, a world built on rationalism, Victorian virtue, and Christian orthodoxy. The very idea that a person could appear fully human yet lack the spiritual architecture that makes one truly alive was nothing short of spiritual heresy. Yet Blavatsky didn't offer it as metaphor. She meant it quite literally. According to her, there existed among us individuals who, while biologically human, lacked the fully developed connection to higher consciousness. She referred to them not as evil, but as incomplete. These were not murderers or monsters, they were shells, empty houses that looked like homes, but no light burned inside. This concept struck a deep and uncomfortable chord because it bypassed the ego and went straight to the soul, or rather, its absence. Blavatsky proposed that the soul wasn't something automatically installed at birth like a piece of furniture in a new apartment. No, it had to be awakened, cultivated, and protected. She suggested that through extreme materialism, moral decay, and spiritual neglect, it was possible not only to remain disconnected from one's higher self, but to lose the connection altogether. In such a state, a person could continue to function, even succeed in society. They could laugh, cry, argue, and achieve. But behind their eyes, there was no real awareness of the sacred. The spark had never been lit, or had long since gone out. This was a deeply unsettling revelation, because if it were true, it meant that not all suffering, not all betrayal, not all cruelty came from wounded souls. Some came from individuals who simply had no soul to begin with. It reframed human interaction in a way that was both terrifying and clarifying. You've likely met someone who could mimic empathy but never actually feel it. Someone who could charm without caring, apologize without remorse, or cause pain without even registering it. Blavatsky's teachings suggest these may not just be psychological conditions, they may be spiritual vacancies. It's easy to see why her work was feared. In challenging the assumption of universal spiritual equality, she didn't just shake the foundation of religion, she threatened the entire social order. If not all people are spiritually awake, then what does that mean for justice, for education, for governance, for trust? The implications were too vast, too dangerous, too real. So, of course, she was ridiculed, slandered, and even accused of fraud. Yet her influence only grew. Today, her writings form the bedrock of countless spiritual movements. Her terminology has seeped into the language of modern mysticism, and her insights continue to haunt the edges of consciousness. The concept of the human shell wasn't meant to induce fear or superiority. It was a wake-up call. It was a warning that sleepwalking through life has consequences far beyond the mundane. It was an invitation to recognize the sacred fire within yourself, and to do everything in your power to keep it burning. Blavatsky didn't offer easy answers or comforting platitudes. She offered a mirror, one that didn't just reflect your face, but your essence. And in that mirror, you had to ask the most dangerous question of all: am I awake? Or am I just another shell, moving through a world I've never truly seen? In a time where appearance is everything, and truth is buried beneath layers of programming and distraction, Blavatsky's voice still echoes, daring, dissonant, necessary. She spoke the unspeakable. And whether we're ready to hear it or not, she left us with a choice we can no longer avoid. Not everyone has a soul. And the more important question, island, do you? What if everything you believe yourself to be, your name, your body, your personality, was only a fraction of the truth? What if who you think you are is merely the outermost shell of something far more vast and complex, something layered, radiant, and deeply misunderstood? There is a map to the human being that was once held in secret, protected by the mystics and adepts of the ancient world. A 7-layered blueprint that shows not only what you are, but what you are meant to become. You see, you're not just a body, you're not even just a mind. You are a convergence of energies and intelligences, a living hierarchy of physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual forces, woven together like threads of light in a cosmic tapestry. According to the ancient teachings revived by mystics such as Helena Blavatsky, the human being is not a singular entity but a composite being made up of 7 distinct principles. These 7 layers define your existence on every level, from the flesh you wear to the spirit you carry. At the foundation of your being is the physical body, the most obvious layer, the one you can touch and see, It is the vehicle, the vessel that allows you to operate in the material world, but it is not you. It is the shell your consciousness wears during this incarnation. Just above that is the linga sharira, also known as the etheric or astral body. This is not your aura or soul. It is the energetic double of your physical form, the template that holds your biological structure in place. When you dream, when you feel something touch you that isn't physically there, you are sensing through this subtle body. Then comes prana, the life force. This is the vital energy that animates the body and flows through every living thing. Without prana, your physical and astral forms would be nothing more than empty containers. It is the breath of existence, the current that sustains the living function of your being. These three, body, etheric double, and life energy, make up the lower triad of human nature. They are bound to the earthly plane, concerned with survival, sensation, and routine. They are necessary, but they are not sufficient to define the human soul. Above this foundational layer is where things begin to shift. The fourth principle is kama manas, your desire, mind. It is the seat of passions, instincts, emotional drives, the part of you that reacts rather than reflects. Kama is what pulls you toward pleasure and away from pain. It is your hunger for recognition, your fear of rejection, your craving for power or comfort. And while this force can drive action, it is often the very thing that traps you in cycles of repetition and unconsciousness. Then comes lower manas, the rational mind, the part of you that reasons, remembers, and categorizes experience. This is the layer that most modern society worships. It is your intellect, your capacity for thought. But here's the paradox. While it feels like the crown of human achievement, it is still not the highest form of consciousness. The rational mind can analyze, but it cannot see the truth. It can argue, but it cannot intuit. It can store knowledge, but it does not generate wisdom. Above the rational mind lies the true bridge to the divine, the higher manas. This is your higher mind, your capacity to perceive abstract truth, moral insight, and spiritual purpose. It is where intuition begins to whisper. It does not need evidence to know, it simply knows. When you suddenly realize that you've been betraying your own path, when you feel a deep calling that makes no logical sense, that's higher manas speaking. But even this is not the peak of your being. The sixth principle is buddhi, your spiritual intuition. Buddhi is not emotion, it is not thought. It is a subtle, wordless awareness that perceives through direct inner knowing. It is your connection to the universal field of consciousness, the thread that binds you to compassion, selflessness, and sacred truth. When buddhi is active, you do not see the world as fragments, you see unity, wholeness. You look at another being and recognize yourself. And finally, the seventh and highest principle is Atma, the pure spirit, the divine essence that is beyond form. Atma is not a personality, it is not a memory, it is not even an identity. It is the eternal flame within you, the part that has never been born and will never die. It is not yours. It is you, the real you, untainted by time, untouched by illusion. Most never touch it consciously. But it is always there, waiting. These last three, higher manas, buddhi, and atma, form what is known as the spiritual triad. They are what make the difference between a person who merely exists and a person who truly lives. They are what distinguish a shell from a soul. But here lies the great spiritual tragedy. Not every human activates these higher principles. In fact, many live their entire lives within the lower four layers, never once accessing the spark of the divine within. Just because you're born in a human body doesn't mean you're spiritually awake. The higher layers are potential, not guarantees. They must be awakened through effort, intention, devotion. And if they are not, then the person remains locked in the lower nature, driven by craving, fear, competition, and imitation. They function, they speak, they laugh, they even love in their own way, but they are not aware. They are asleep within the illusion of self. This is why two people can walk through life so differently. One radiating presence, depth, and moral clarity. The other operating like a mimic, a being of reactions and empty gestures. One is moving upward through the ladder of consciousness. The other is spinning in circles, mistaking thought for truth and emotion for soul. And, while the world often celebrates intellect, charisma, or ambition, it rarely sees the true signs of spiritual activation. It confuses noise for presence, confidence for awareness. You may be wondering, how do you know which parts of yourself are active? How do you know if your higher manas or buddhi are awake? The answer is simple: by what moves you. If your thoughts are dominated by fear, comparison, and control, you are trapped in the lower layers. If your actions are dictated by ego, image, and survival, your higher self is asleep. But if you feel drawn to truth even when it costs you, if you sense a longing for the infinite, a call to serve, a hunger for the real, then something in you is already beginning to rise. The ancient mystics didn't share this map to scare you. They shared it so you could find yourself, so you could see clearly where you are and where you're going. The sevenfold model is not just philosophy. It is a mirror. And if you have the courage to look deeply, to peel back the illusions, you will begin to sense which layers are guiding your life. The soul is not a given. It is a journey. And every thought, every decision, every moment of silence is either activating your higher nature or dimming it. You are not just one self. You are many. And only by choosing, moment by moment, to rise above the noise of the lower mind, can you awaken the divine spark that lives quietly, eternally, at the center of your being. You've probably met one before, maybe at a party, in a meeting, or even in your own family. Someone who says all the right things, smiles at the right moments, and mirrors human behavior almost perfectly, and yet, something feels off. You can't explain it in words, but you feel it in your gut. An emptiness behind the eyes. A presence that doesn't really feel like presence at all. That's not imagination, it's perception. And what you may be sensing in those moments is what mystics and esoteric traditions have long referred to as a human shell, a body that appears alive, but inside is spiritually vacant. A human shell is not simply an unkind person or someone who's lost their way. It's something far more chilling. It's a person whose higher spiritual faculties have never awakened, or worse, have been lost entirely. They breathe, speak, laugh, and cry just like anyone else. But those functions are purely mechanical, reflexes, not revelations. You might see ambition, intelligence, or even charm. But beneath the surface, there is no inner dialogue with the divine, no quiet voice of conscience, no sacred fire that guides them toward truth or meaning. There is motion, but no depth, a human, in structure, but not in spirit. You might be wondering how that's even possible. How could someone exist in the world, working, loving, building a life, without something as central as a soul? The answer lies in understanding what it truly means to be human. We often assume that being born in a human body automatically makes us spiritually whole. But many spiritual systems disagree. In their view, what we call a soul is not just a passive ingredient tossed into the human form like seasoning in a recipe. It is a divine potential that must be cultivated, activated, and aligned through conscious effort. It is not an automatic feature, it is a sacred inheritance that can either be embraced or squandered. Without this higher awareness, a person remains confined to the lower layers of existence. They live from instinct, reaction, programming. Their decisions are shaped by external influences, not inner wisdom. They chase pleasure, success, status, or control, not because they are inherently malicious, but because there is no higher compass steering them otherwise. To such a person, morality is conditional, love is transactional, and truth is negotiable. They may mimic passion, but they don't burn with it. They may say they care, but they do not feel the weight of consequence that comes from knowing every action ripples through the unseen fabric of consciousness. To them, life is a stage, and they are simply playing a part. And yet, the greatest tragedy is not the absence of soul at birth, it's the slow death of the soul over time. You see, it is possible to come into this life with the full potential of divine awareness, only to lose it through a long and quiet erosion. This doesn't happen suddenly, it doesn't arrive like lightning, it's more like rot, invisible at first, growing silently in the dark. Materialism is often the first cut, not the need to survive or thrive, that's natural. But the worship of the material, the obsession with surface, the blind pursuit of accumulation without meaning. The moment your value becomes measured by numbers, possessions, or the approval of the crowd, the inner voice starts to dim. Slowly, the soul begins to shrink, as if suffocated by the very things it once thought would set it free. Ego is the next wound. The more we build false identities, masks that seek validation rather than truth, the more we separate from the authentic self. Ego feeds on comparison, competition, and control. It is the architect of illusion, and while it may promise strength, what it actually builds is a fortress that locks the soul inside, unable to breathe, unable to grow. In time, the ego becomes so thick, so impenetrable, that even when the soul cries out, it is no longer heard. Then comes spiritual neglect, the quiet killer, the daily choice to not listen, to not reflect, to not seek. Every time we ignore the whispers of conscience, every time we suppress the inner nudge to question, to awaken, to break free from habit, we participate in the forgetting. It's not always done out of malice. Often, it's just fatigue, distraction, or the slow hypnotism of routine. But over years, even decades, this neglect forms a chasm between who we are and who we were meant to become. And in some cases, that chasm becomes so wide that the soul can no longer bridge it. This is where we enter the realm of irreversible spiritual decay, a concept too terrifying for most to accept, and yet, it explains so much of what we see in the world today. There are those who have so deeply buried their divine nature that it no longer speaks, not because it was never there, but because it has been silenced for too long. You can lose a connection. You can lose clarity. You can even lose faith. But to lose the soul, to extinguish the light that makes you you, is to become a hollow echo of the person you were meant to be. When that happens, the human still walks, still smiles, still participates in the rituals of life, but inside, they are empty. Not metaphorically, literally. The inner temple has collapsed, and no prayers are spoken within it. There is no inner world, only reflections of what society wants them to be. These are the people who no longer question why they are here. They no longer feel awe. They no longer feel guilt. They no longer feel in the way the soul feels. They only simulate. And that simulation can be dangerous. Because these shells, as lifeless as they may be spiritually, are often skilled at imitation. They blend in. Sometimes, they lead. Sometimes, they manipulate. Sometimes, they smile with eyes that have forgotten what it means to see. And because they have no internal compass, they are easily swayed, easily programmed, easily used. In this way, they become vessels, not for divinity, but for whatever dominant force surrounds them. Media, dogma, power, control. The shell doesn't choose its influence, it absorbs it. You've likely seen this reflected in culture, where cruelty is normalized, conscience is mocked, and depth is dismissed as weakness. This isn't simply the result of ignorance, it is the consequence of soul, death, on a mass scale. A society built on shells can function efficiently, even thrive on the surface. But it will feel cold, hollow, rootless. Because the soul is the soil from which all true beauty grows. Without it, everything becomes artificial. And yet, the scariest part isn't that this condition exists, it's that you might never know when it begins. The descent into the shell is not marked by thunder or warning sirens. It begins with small compromises. When you say what you don't mean, when you do what you don't believe in, when you stop listening to that quiet knowing inside, piece by piece, the soul steps back, and eventually, if not called upon, it leaves altogether. So where does that leave you? It leaves you with a sacred responsibility, to tend to the flame within you before it flickers, to protect your soul not with walls, but with awareness, to remember that your essence is not invincible, it is precious, it must be honored, fed, loved, or it too will fade into the silence. There's a reason so many ancient teachings warn about losing one's soul. It's not poetic, it's prophetic, because once you become a shell, you may not even know what you've lost. And the tragedy is not in the losing, it's in the forgetting that you ever had it. What if I told you that the world you see around you, the cities, the laws, the religions, the social norms, was never built for your freedom, that everything you've been taught to admire, chase, and fear was designed not to awaken your spirit, but to keep it asleep? long before modern psychology, before organized religion claimed a monopoly on truth, there was a group of spiritual rebels who saw through the illusion. They were called the Gnostics. And they didn't just believe the world was flawed, they believed it was a trap. To the Gnostics, the material world was not the masterpiece of a benevolent creator, it was the prison of a false god. They spoke of a divine realm, distant and hidden, from which a spark of true light had fallen into matter. That spark exists in some people, but not in all. This was the dangerous truth they carried, that not every human being was created equal in spirit, that there were types among humanity, and only some had the potential to awaken to the divine reality beyond the veil. The Gnostics divided humanity into three fundamental types. The first, and most common, were called the Hylikoi, the material ones. These are the people fully identified with the physical world, driven entirely by instinct, fear, pleasure, and control. For the Hylikoi, survival is God. Success is measured in status, possession, or dominance. They do not seek higher knowledge because they are not aware that it exists. Their lives begin and end on the surface. And to the Gnostic mystics, these were the ones who, despite being biologically human, were spiritually inert. Then there were the Psychikoi, the soulful ones. These individuals possess a basic soul, a moral center, the capacity for empathy, reflection, and spiritual curiosity. They struggle between the pull of the material and the call of the divine. They are aware that there is more to life than what can be seen, but they are vulnerable to confusion, to misdirection. Their path depends on their choices. They can ascend or fall. They are the battleground between spirit and matter. And finally, the Pneumatikoi, the spiritual ones. These are the rarest of the three, those who carry within them a living fragment of the original divine source. For the Pneumatikoi, awakening is not just possible, it is inevitable. They come into the world with a deep sense of not belonging, an unshakable knowing that this world is not their home. They are the seers, the mystics, the sacred disruptors, the ones who, even from childhood, sense the illusion, who feel the pressure of the world's madness pushing against the truth they carry inside. These three types coexist in the same society, speak the same languages, walk the same streets, but they are not the same. And this was the Gnostics' warning. The most dangerous assumption you can make is believing that everyone around you sees reality as you do, because the truth is, many are incapable of seeing it at all. To the Gnostics, the tragedy wasn't just that the Hylikoi were asleep, it was that they were being used by hidden forces to maintain the prison of the world. These forces were called the archons, rulers, but not in the way we understand rulers today. The archons were not politicians or kings, they were energetic intelligences, parasites of consciousness, born of the false god they called the demiurge. This demiurge was the architect of the material world, a counterfeit creator who mistook himself for the ultimate source. Blind to the divine light beyond his own creation, he declared himself God, and demanded worship from beings far more ancient and luminous than he could comprehend. The archons served him as jailers, as mind parasites, as enforcers of illusion. They did not operate through brute force, they operated through belief, through distraction, through control of thought. Their goal was simple: keep the Pneumatikoi from realizing who they were, keep the Psychikoi trapped in confusion, and use the Hylikoi as willing puppets, to build and maintain the matrix of control. Look around you today, and you'll see the fingerprints of the archons in every system that numbs consciousness. You'll find them in media that glorifies violence and vanity, in education that rewards obedience over wisdom, in religions that teach you to fear a God who demands submission instead of awakening. The archons don't need to possess you, they only need to program you, and the easiest targets are the ones who have never glimpsed the truth, the ones who are human only in form. That phrase, their phrase, carries a chilling weight. Human in form, which means not human in essence. The Hylikoi walk, speak, and perform roles like everyone else. But inside, there is no flame of remembrance, no pull toward the infinite. They are not evil, they are empty. And because they are empty, they are programmable. They follow trends, they parrot ideologies, they defend systems that exploit them. They mock what they do not understand, and they resist anything that would awaken them, because to awaken would be to see their own hollowness. And yet, the danger isn't limited to them. If you are a psychikoi, if you are on the edge of awakening, you are the real target, because you are the wild card, the ones who haven't fully remembered, but have enough light to begin questioning. And that is exactly where the archons strike hardest. They flood you with noise, with self-doubt, with obligations and temptations that drain your energy and distract your purpose. They make you chase validation instead of truth, and they whisper, always, that you are not enough, not ready, not real. But here's the secret they never wanted you to know. The moment you begin to question the world, you have already begun to awaken from it. The Gnostics didn't share this knowledge to promote division. They shared it to offer direction. Not all humans are equal in spiritual essence, but all have a choice. Even the psychikoi, hovering between shadow and flame, can become pneumatikoi through inner work, remembrance, and surrender to the truth that lives within. Ask yourself honestly, how much of your life is dictated by the outer world? How much of your energy is consumed by appearances, survival, and roles that never nourished your spirit? How often do you feel like you're living someone else's script? That is the hallmark of archonic influence, when your soul is buried beneath layers of conditioning so thick you forget you ever had one. But the soul is patient, it waits, it watches, it whispers, and in moments of stillness, or crisis, or grace, it surfaces, and you remember, if only for a breath, who you really are. That's all it takes. A breath, a moment, a flicker of gnosis. The truth isn't loud, it doesn't need to be, it just needs space, and that space is created the moment you stop chasing illusions and turn inward. The Gnostic underground may be ancient, but its relevance has never been more urgent. We are living in a world ruled by appearances, distractions, and false lights. A world where the soulless are elevated and the awakened are ridiculed. But you were never meant to fit into a world built to suppress you. You were meant to remember, to see, to burn with the light that the archons have spent eons trying to extinguish. So if you feel like an outsider in your own culture, if you've always known something was off but couldn't name it, if you've felt the weight of an invisible pressure trying to dull your inner light, know this: you are not broken, you are remembering. And that remembrance is a threat to the very fabric of control. The ancient Gnostics risked everything to pass this knowledge to the few who could carry it forward, and now it's in your hands. The question is, what will you do with it? Will you ignore it, dismiss it, bury it beneath more distractions, or will you follow the thread, deeper and deeper, until you find the place where the archons cannot follow? That place is within you, it always has been, and it always will be. Deep within you, beneath your thoughts, beneath your emotions, beneath even your sense of identity, there lies something timeless, a flicker, a whisper, a quiet light untouched by the noise of the world. This is the divine spark, the hidden seed of divine potential that lives within all who are truly alive. It's not just a poetic idea or a spiritual metaphor. It is the very essence of what connects you to something greater than the body you inhabit or the roles you play. It is the flame that whispers, "You are more than this," and yet, not everyone feels it. Not everyone recognizes it. Some never discover it at all, and some, in the most heartbreaking cases, lose it completely. You may have felt it before, during a moment of stillness, or beauty, or profound connection. It can come as a wave of presence that fills you with a strange knowing that cannot be explained. It's not loud, it doesn't shout, it moves quietly through you, like warmth in your chest, or a strange gravity pulling you inward. It's the part of you that knows truth before logic arrives, the part of you that cannot be corrupted by fear, status, or shame. It's that feeling when time stops and you suddenly remember who you are, not your name, not your job, but your essence. That spark is not from this world, it is from the source. But let me ask you something that most people never dare to voice out loud. Have you ever looked into someone's eyes and felt nothing, not silence, not peace, but a flatness, a void? As if something was missing, even though they smiled, even though they spoke, even though they laughed. You couldn't explain it, but something inside you knew. They were not home. You felt it instinctively. No matter how intelligent they were, how polished their persona, how socially engaged they appeared, something vital wasn't there. It wasn't darkness, it was absence, an emptiness where presence should have been. That's because not everyone has awakened the divine spark. Not everyone carries that inner flame, or if they do, it lies buried so deep beneath fear, ego, and conditioning that it no longer burns. And while that may be hard to accept, it explains more than we often want to admit. You see, the tragedy of those we call soulless is not that they are evil, it is that they are empty. There is a difference. Evil, at least, is still an expression of will. It still has movement. But spiritual emptiness is stagnation. It is the absence of life, not its inversion. It is a hollow echo of what could have been, a sacred possibility left unlived. The divine spark is seated within us like a buried treasure. But unlike most treasures, this one cannot be stolen or given. It must be unearthed, it must be chosen, and many never do. Why? Because awakening the spark requires stillness in a world that thrives on noise. It requires sincerity in a society addicted to performance. It requires courage when everything around you rewards conformity. Most people aren't willing to risk the comfort of their illusions for the discomfort of the truth, so they build a life around the outer world, never realizing they've sacrificed the inner one. Others lose the spark not through avoidance, but through erosion, slowly, quietly, every time they choose safety over soul, every time they suppress their intuition for the sake of appearance, every time they betray what they know in their heart to be true, even if they can't put it into words. The divine spark doesn't vanish in a flash, it fades with neglect. It dims every time you ignore that sacred discomfort that rises when your life drifts away from alignment. And when that happens for long enough, the flame goes out, not with violence, but with silence. This is not a judgment, it's a heartbreak, because within every person lies the potential for that spark. But not everyone takes the journey to find it. Some refuse to look. Others stop looking when it becomes hard. And some, perhaps the most sorrowful of all, don't even know it's missing. They live through mirrors, reflecting what others want, need, or expect. They wear faces, but have no center. They chase sensation but feel no true joy. They talk about life, but never actually touch it. These are the souls who have forgotten they ever had one. And still, there's something even more subtle. There are those who believe they've awakened, but what they've actually cultivated is a spiritual ego, a polished identity, an idea of enlightenment, without the flame itself. These individuals can speak the language of truth without carrying its frequency. They can quote scriptures, recite affirmations, and teach others to ascend, yet remain untouched by the mystery themselves. Because the divine spark is not activated through knowledge, it's awakened through surrender, through humility, through inner silence so deep that the soul finally has room to speak. If you've ever wondered why some people seem incapable of empathy, incapable of awe, incapable of remorse, this is the reason. Without the divine spark, there is no compass. Without the flame, there is no light to reveal what is sacred. And when the sacred is absent, everything becomes strategy. Everything becomes transaction. People become tools. Relationships become performances. Truth becomes optional. There may be no malice in it, but there is no reverence either. And without reverence, life loses its soul. So what keeps the spark alive? It's not rituals or beliefs or outer purity. It's your willingness to be vulnerable to the truth, even when it hurts. It's your hunger for something real, something deeper than this surface world. It's your choice to pause when the world tells you to rush, to feel when others numb, to listen when others speak. The divine spark is not loud, but it is always present, and the more you honor it, the more it grows. But if you abandon it, if you ignore it long enough, eventually, it will retreat. Not to punish you, but to protect itself. The soul cannot live where it is not welcome. And when it leaves, what remains is the shell we spoke of before, a perfect copy of a human life, missing only the one thing that gives it meaning. This is not a message of fear, it is a call to remembrance. Because if you're listening to this, the spark is still alive in you. You wouldn't be drawn to these words if you were already lost. You wouldn't feel that strange mixture of discomfort and recognition unless the flame within you was trying to grow, And that's the beautiful truth. The divine spark is not gone, it's waiting, silently, patiently, for you to choose it again. And so, the question is not, does the divine spark exist? It's, are you ready to let it guide you? Because one day, you may look into a mirror, or into someone else's eyes, and realize that the difference between presence and absence, between aliveness and emptiness, was never about biology or background. It was about one thing only, the fire inside, and whether or not you kept it burning. What if I told you that some of the people who smile at you, flatter you, or even seem to care about you, are not what they appear to be? That beneath the polished exterior, beneath the carefully chosen words and well-rehearsed emotions, there is nothing real, no depth, no presence, no soul. You wouldn't know by looking. You wouldn't know by listening. They pass as human in every way, but when you stand close enough, when you let yourself feel beyond the surface, something inside you senses it. Something feels off, like walking into a beautiful house that somehow echoes with emptiness. The soulless do not wear signs. They don't appear monstrous or broken. In fact, many seem more composed than the average person, articulate, self-assured, even magnetic. But this charm is not coming from the heart. It's borrowed, constructed, and mimicked. It's the imitation of connection without the actual frequency of it. And if you don't know what to look for, if you don't know what to feel for, you'll miss it. Again and again. To recognize a soul-filled being, you don't need them to speak. You feel it in their presence. There's a warmth that doesn't come from what they say, but from the way their energy meets yours. A subtle resonance, like tuning forks vibrating in alignment. Their gaze is soft but penetrating. Their words carry weight, not just cleverness, but meaning. And even in silence, there's an atmosphere around them, something gentle and aware, a quiet current of life that moves through them. Now, contrast that with the shell. On the outside, everything might look identical, but when you lean in just a bit closer, when you stop being distracted by what they want you to see, you start to notice the hollowness. Their eyes don't meet you, they scan you. Their words are polished, but they lack a pulse. You might laugh with them, feel flattered by them, even be temporarily impressed, but after every interaction, you feel subtly drained. A strange emptiness lingers, as though you were just feeding something rather than sharing something. That is the signature of the soulless. They consume attention, energy, reactions, but they do not reciprocate, because they cannot. Not in the way a soul can. The soul radiates. It gives off light, warmth, presence, even in pain, but the shell only reflects. It mirrors what's around it. It can study kindness and act it out. It can memorize empathy and perform it. It can learn the language of spirituality, growth, even love, and wear it like a costume. But the energy underneath is missing, and that absence, once you learn to feel it, is unmistakable. You may already know what I'm talking about. Maybe you've been in a relationship where everything looked right on paper, the gestures, the plans, the smiles, but deep down, you felt invisible. Like you were interacting with someone who was only half there. You tried to connect, to go deeper, to open your heart, and yet no matter how much you gave, it never touched them. They didn't resist you, they simply didn't receive you. Because there was nothing inside to receive you. No inner world, no true center, just patterns, responses, behaviors. This is one of the most difficult spiritual truths to accept, that not every person you meet is capable of connection, not because they're broken or damaged, but because there is no activated soul within them to connect to. They are shells, animated by instinct, thought, programming. They are biologically alive, socially functional, even intellectually sharp, but spiritually vacant. And here is where it gets more dangerous. Many of these shell-like beings are highly skilled at mimicry. They learn quickly what evokes trust, what earns admiration, what triggers compassion. They know how to pose as awake without ever truly being conscious. They talk about energy, healing, alignment, but it's all regurgitated from books, videos, or people they've studied. There is no lived truth in their words, no energetic transmission, only sound. You might think, if they're not harming anyone, does it really matter? But that's the illusion. Because when you interact with someone who has no soul resonance, your own energy begins to disorient. You start doubting your instincts. You begin second-guessing your emotional intelligence. Why? Because your soul is reaching for something that isn't there, and every time it tries, it gets no response, no depth, no mirroring. Over time, this can wear down your spiritual clarity. The most sensitive among us, the empaths, the intuitives, the spiritually attuned, are often the most susceptible to these energetic mimics. Because you're used to feeling for truth, you want to see the good in others. You naturally project your own inner depth onto the people around you. But the shell cannot hold what you are trying to give it. It can echo it, but it cannot return it. It can nod at your insights, repeat your phrases, even show up in moments of need. But it does all of this from a place of calculation, not connection. This is why you may walk away from some people feeling confused, not because anything dramatic happened, but because something subtle didn't. There was no meeting, no communion, only motion, and in that absence, your soul begins to ache. The shell has no moral compass, not because it chooses evil, but because it lacks the internal architecture to feel what is right or wrong. It can follow rules, obey laws, conform to norms, but these are adopted from the outside. They are not born from within. The soulless can be polite, generous, even charming, but they cannot love in the sacred sense of the word. They cannot feel reverence for life. They cannot weep from the heart. And when the moment calls for true vulnerability, they vanish, sometimes physically, but often emotionally. They go cold, blank, unreachable. Some of them become leaders, influencers, even spiritual teachers, because they have learned how to speak the language that draws attention. But pay close attention. Watch the effect they have on people, not their popularity, not their performance, but their resonance. Do they inspire silence in the soul? Do they awaken truth in the listener? Or do they leave people dazzled but disempowered? True soul presence humbles you, it quiets you, it reminds you of your own divinity, but mimicry flatters the ego. It excites the nervous system without feeding the spirit. And in a world obsessed with appearances, the mimic will often rise faster than the authentic, because illusion is easier to sell than truth. You must learn to feel people, not judge them, not label them, but feel them. Trust what your body tells you after an interaction. Do you feel nourished, clearer, more present? Or do you feel foggy, anxious, uncertain? Your soul knows who is real. It always has. But modern life teaches you to override that knowing, to be polite, to give people the benefit of the doubt, to silence your discernment in the name of open-mindedness. But spiritual discernment is not judgment, it's wisdom. And in a time where hollow vessels walk among us, it is not just helpful, it is essential. Because the longer you pretend not to notice the soulless, the more you risk forgetting what it feels like to be truly alive, to walk with depth, to speak from essence, to feel the sacred pulse within yourself. So begin to notice the ones who speak without anchoring, the ones who mirror but never initiate, the ones who charm but leave you empty. Don't fear them, don't hate them, but don't feed them either. Your energy is sacred, your presence is light, and it was never meant to be wasted on the hollow. Not everyone is here to awaken, some are here to distract, others are simply passing through. But you are here to remember, to feel, to see, and most of all, to be the very presence that others cannot imitate. That is your power, that is your protection, and that is how you spot what cannot be spoken. Not all emptiness stays empty. Sometimes, what looks like a vacant vessel becomes an invitation, an open door, and when that door remains unguarded long enough, something eventually steps through. It doesn't come with red eyes or horns. It doesn't announce itself with fire. In fact, its arrival is often so subtle you don't notice it, until it's too late. The idea that human beings can be occupied by something other than their own essence is not just the subject of folklore and horror movies. It is a deeply rooted teaching in esoteric and mystical traditions that speaks to something many people instinctively feel but cannot explain. Sometimes, people change in ways that defy logic. They lose empathy, lose warmth, lose something vital, and in its place, something cold and calculated begins to operate. These are not always signs of psychological illness. Sometimes they are signs of spiritual occupation. There is a term that has echoed through ancient teachings and mystical texts: walk-ins. These are said to be entities, non-physical intelligences, that step into the human experience through a body that has either been vacated or weakened. Sometimes this happens when the original soul chooses to leave, perhaps through trauma, spiritual defeat, or sheer exhaustion. Other times, the soul remains but becomes so passive, so withdrawn, that it leaves space for something else to share its home. While some spiritual circles describe walk-ins as benevolent or neutral forces, there is another side to this phenomenon that is far more troubling, because just as a home can be visited by a guest, it can also be invaded by something with darker intentions. Helena Blavatsky spoke of these entities not as metaphors, but as real presences, disincarnate intelligences that no longer possess a body of their own, and yet still hunger for experience. These are not spirits in the traditional sense. They are fragments, leftovers, consciousnesses that, for one reason or another, did not fully integrate into the cycle of reincarnation or spiritual evolution. Some are confused, some are cunning, and some are malicious. But all of them are disembodied, and all of them seek entry points. A human shell, soulless or spiritually vacant, becomes the perfect vehicle. There is no inner light to repel them, no spiritual boundaries to hold them back. The vessel is open, and so they enter. At first, the person may seem unchanged, but over time, something begins to shift. The eyes may remain the same, but the gaze becomes harder. The smile, though familiar, no longer reaches the soul. Old habits vanish overnight, replaced by new obsessions, darker impulses, or an uncanny stillness that feels more like a presence observing rather than participating. The body remains active, the voice still speaks. But the spirit behind the curtain is no longer the same. What was once a person is now a host. In today's language, we describe these people in psychological terms: narcissists, manipulators, energy vampires. We assign labels that fit into our cultural understanding of behavior, often unaware that we're describing the symptoms of something far deeper. Have you ever felt completely drained after spending time with someone, even though they didn't raise their voice or argue? Have you ever been gaslit to the point that you questioned your own reality, only to see your confusion met with calm indifference? These are not just behavioral patterns. In many cases, they are energetic dynamics. These individuals don't just take your time or attention, they feed on your energy, and they do it without remorse. The reason is simple: you are alive inside, they are not. Or rather, what is operating through them is not the original soul, but something else, something that mimics life but does not feel it. These are the psychic parasites, entities that cannot generate energy of their own, and so must harvest it from others. They thrive in environments of chaos, fear, and emotional vulnerability. They feed off confusion, off conflict, off the subtle energetic dissonance that occurs when you doubt your own worth. And because they lack the moral compass that comes from soul awareness, they are incredibly efficient at what they do. They don't always act violently or overtly. In fact, most are quiet, charming, even charismatic. They read social cues, mimic emotional responses, and know how to position themselves as the victim, the hero, or the misunderstood genius. But underneath the performance is a hollow hunger, a need to feed, to dominate, to extract. These people do not grow from connection, they consume it. They are not inspired by your joy, they siphon it. They do not celebrate your awakening, they mock it, resist it, or quietly sabotage it. And what's more terrifying is that they often don't know why they're doing it. The shell, once taken over, may have no conscious awareness that it is being used. From the outside, you're still talking to the same person, but underneath, the internal operator has changed. They may still speak your language, but the soul behind the words has vanished. You'll notice it in the way they respond to beauty, with indifference, to vulnerability, with manipulation, to truth, with deflection or distortion. You'll feel it in your body first: a tightening, a heaviness, a cold that lingers after the conversation ends. Not all emptiness is dangerous, but when a shell becomes a vessel for darker forces, it is not just empty, it is weaponized. These vessels can be used to disrupt, deceive, and derail the spiritual paths of others. They may infiltrate spiritual communities, pose as mentors, or attach themselves to sensitive and intuitive individuals, draining their energy while appearing innocent. This is not random, it is strategic. Because the more light you carry, the more attractive you become to what has none. The more awake you are, the more you threaten systems that rely on sleep. And so, the forces that work through these shells don't merely distract you, they try to destroy your clarity, your purpose, your sense of truth. This is not a fairy tale. This is a reality that spiritual traditions across the world have warned about for centuries. In ancient texts, these forces were called demons, archons, shadow beings, or jinn. In modern times, we sanitize them with clinical terms or dismiss them as metaphor. But their influence remains. They operate best when unseen, undetected, unspoken, and their greatest advantage is your disbelief. But awareness changes everything. When you begin to recognize the symptoms, not just in others, but in yourself, you begin to reclaim your sovereignty. If you've ever felt like you were being pulled into behaviors that weren't yours, if you've ever noticed thoughts entering your mind that felt invasive or foreign, if you've ever felt yourself being drained without explanation, it may be time to look deeper. Not every thought you think is yours. Not every impulse comes from within. And not every person you meet is operating from their own soul. You don't need to be afraid, but you do need to be conscious. Protecting yourself doesn't require aggression, it requires awareness, boundaries, stillness. A refusal to compromise your energy just to be liked or understood. Your soul is not a resource to be harvested, it is a sanctuary to be guarded. Not with fear, but with love. Because once you see clearly, the parasites lose their power. They cannot feed on what is sovereign. They cannot enter where light resides. So if you've been feeling the drain, the confusion, the cold weight of unseen manipulation, trust your instincts. The world is not only physical, you are not only a mind, and what moves through people is not always their own. Stay anchored, stay lit from within, and remember, where the soul is strong, no shadow can take hold. What if I told you the very world you were born into, its schools, its entertainment, its politics, and even its ambitions, was designed not to awaken your soul, but to bury it? Not by accident, but by design, that what you call culture has become a machine, and its purpose is not to elevate consciousness, but to produce copies, hollow ones, empty vessels in human form, souls stripped of curiosity, wonder, and inner silence, replaced by noise, urgency, and the constant need to be seen. From the moment you take your first breath, society begins to program you. Before you can speak, you're taught what to fear. Before you can think for yourself, you're handed a script. And every institution you encounter along the way, schools, governments, corporations, churches, feeds that script with precision. But what few ever question is who wrote it, and why. You're told to sit still, follow orders, compete for grades that measure nothing of your essence. You're told that success is external, that your value is proven by how well you can conform to the expectations of a system that has no interest in your soul. What it wants is your obedience, your attention, your energy. These become currency in a culture addicted to surfaces. The system feeds the lower self relentlessly, that part of you ruled by fear, desire, envy, and survival. It's that part the machine understands best, because the lower self is predictable. It buys what it's told to buy. It panics when threatened. It clings to identity and resists change. It sees difference as danger and routine as safety. So society cultivates the lower self like a crop. It waters your insecurities, it fertilizes your doubts, it shines artificial light on the illusions you're told to chase. And the results? You can see them everywhere. People addicted to validation but starved of real connection. Entire lives built on performance, curated, edited, filtered, until nothing true remains. We scroll endlessly, not because we're curious, but because we're trying to fill something that cannot be filled from the outside. That hollow ache inside so many people, it is not a personal failure. It is the intended outcome of a culture that replaces soul with brand, truth with trend, presence with productivity. Consumerism isn't just an economic system, it's a psychological weapon. It tells you that wholeness can be bought. That meaning lives in your next purchase, your next look, your next upgrade. But it never delivers, because it was never meant to. The goal isn't your fulfillment, the goal is your dependence. And the emptier you feel, the more you consume. Media takes it even further. It doesn't just reflect culture, it engineers it. What you see on your screens is not just entertainment, it's conditioning. The narratives you're fed reinforce the belief that beauty is surface, that love is possession, that power is dominance. Stories of soul, of depth, of awakening, are buried beneath waves of distraction. And when they do appear, they're sanitized, made palatable, stripped of their radical truth, so they don't disrupt the program. Politics plays its part too. It keeps you focused on division, on enemies, on external saviors. It teaches you to outsource your power, to believe that change comes from institutions rather than from within. It feeds the illusion that if the right person wins, the world will heal. But no leader can give you what you have not claimed for yourself. No system built on unconsciousness can deliver liberation. It can only sell you a more comfortable prison. And this is what no one tells you, that the soulless aren't just born, they are manufactured, slowly, systematically, one distraction at a time, one compromise at a time, one numbing behavior at a time, until the light inside fades and all that remains is a well-behaved echo of what was once a living soul. You've seen it happen. Maybe you've even felt it happening inside yourself. The slow forgetting, the growing fatigue, that sense of watching your own life from the outside. That is not depression, that is spiritual malnutrition. You are not sick, you are starving. And the system that made you starve will never offer you real food. It can't. Because a soul that wakes up becomes unpredictable. It stops buying. It stops obeying. It asks questions that make others uncomfortable. It remembers its origin, and that threatens everything. This is why the machine keeps you busy, keeps you scrolling, keeps you comparing. Because stillness is dangerous. Silence is subversive. In the quiet, you start to feel again. And feeling leads to remembering. And remembering leads to reclaiming your sovereignty, your divinity, your responsibility. Mass spiritual numbness isn't a side effect of modern life. It is modern life. The system needs you numb to keep functioning. Because a society built on consumption, comparison, and control cannot survive if people begin to feel deeply, to question, to seek, to awaken. So how does it create the soulless? Not through violence, through distraction, not through suppression, through seduction. You're not forced to forget who you are, you're enticed to, slowly. Through endless options, through artificial success, through curated lives that seem perfect but feel lifeless. And most don't even realize it's happening. They think they're living, but they're only reacting, they're only repeating. And the most tragic part, most of this is celebrated. The most disconnected are often the most rewarded. The ones who've mastered the game of image, performance, and external power rise fastest. They are praised, promoted, idolized, not because they're whole, but because they've become useful. Tools of a larger agenda that has no interest in awakening, only in expansion. The more they reflect the system's values, the more they are elevated. Meanwhile, those who feel too deeply, who question too much, who refuse to play the game, are dismissed, silenced, or ridiculed. This is not a glitch. It is engineered. A culture that produces more shells than souls is not failing. It's succeeding at what it was designed to do: replicate unconsciousness. And it does this not by suppressing your soul directly, but by convincing you that you don't have one. Or worse, that it doesn't matter. But you can feel the truth. It's in your bones, in your dreams, in the quiet moments when the noise fades and the real you starts to surface. That aching for something more, that's your soul knocking. That restlessness you feel even when everything looks fine, that's the part of you that remembers. The part that can't be bought, branded, or programmed. The part that knows this world is not your home, it's your training ground. If you've ever looked around and thought, there has to be more than this, you're not broken, you're alive, you're waking up, and the system has no defense against a soul that remembers itself. It can distract you, yes, but it cannot destroy you, because what you are is eternal, sacred, untouchable. And the moment you stop feeding the machine with your attention, your fear, your conformity, you begin to reclaim that truth. So ask yourself, what parts of your life are feeding your soul? And what parts are feeding your shell? What habits are numbing you? What voices are shaping you? Who benefits from your sleep? The answers aren't comfortable, but they are clarifying. And in that clarity, you begin the slow, beautiful, terrifying process of deprogramming, of detaching from the artificial self and returning to the one that was never artificial to begin with. The one that came here not to fit in, but to remember, to feel, to awaken. And once you do, you'll never again mistake a performance for a person. You'll never again sell your essence for approval. And you'll never again confuse success with soul. You'll know. And in knowing, you'll be free. There is a quiet tragedy unfolding all around you, so subtle that most never even see it. It's not in the wars, or the headlines, or the chaos that plays out on your screen. It's in the people walking beside you every day, living, speaking, laughing, yet no longer fully alive. You can feel it sometimes, when someone looks at you, and you sense that something inside them has dimmed beyond recognition. Not sadness, not stress, not even hatred, but something else. An emptiness so complete it's as if the person inside has already left. And perhaps, in many ways, they have. Because when a soul is not awakened, it begins to degrade. Slowly, invisibly, like a fruit that still looks ripe on the outside but has already begun to rot within. At the core of every human being lies a divine invitation, the call to awaken, to rise beyond instinct and imitation, to move from survival to sacred remembrance. But awakening is not guaranteed. It's not automatic just because you're born into a body. The soul, while infinite in origin, is not immune to neglect. It requires attention, nurturing, devotion. Without that, it begins to retreat. First emotionally, then energetically, until eventually, it disconnects entirely. And once it does, the body remains, but the essence is gone. This disconnection doesn't happen overnight. It begins in moments. Moments when truth is silenced in favor of comfort, when intuition is ignored in favor of logic, when authenticity is traded for performance. These choices compound. Over time, the inner voice becomes harder to hear, the sacred becomes irrelevant, the heart numbs. And slowly, the soul, unable to thrive in such a barren internal landscape, starts to pull away. It's not punishment, it's preservation. Like a flame withdrawing from a room with no air, the soul knows when it is no longer welcome. And when it leaves, something much colder takes its place. What remains is a human shell, a functioning vessel with no true inhabitant. But here's what most never understand. These shells don't just sit idle, they continue to operate. They move through life, form relationships, make decisions. But the engine running them has changed. No longer guided by a higher intelligence, they become reactive, fragmented, and hollow. They are not inherently malicious. In fact, many appear kind, helpful, even charming, but without the soul's influence, they are vulnerable, open, programmable. These are the individuals most susceptible to being used by larger forces that thrive in unconsciousness, ideologies, systems, entities. Without the soul's discernment, these shells latch on to whatever belief, group, or authority gives them a sense of identity. They stop asking why, they stop questioning, they become vessels for repetition, tools for manipulation. You've seen them. People who parrot narratives with robotic conviction, people who enforce rules without empathy, people who cause harm and feel no conflict because, in their inner world, there is no deeper voice to challenge what they've been told. It's not that they are evil, it's that there's no soul left to resist the programming. And that's what makes them so dangerous. Because when a human loses contact with their soul, they lose their compass. They lose the part of themselves that seeks meaning, feels remorse, or senses sacredness in others. They become efficient, but not ethical, capable, but not compassionate. You can debate with them, plead with them, even cry in front of them, but nothing changes. Not because they don't care, but because they literally can't. The part of them that would respond to your humanity has already died. And in its place is a system of behaviors, beliefs, and identities that are not truly theirs. They are echoes, programs running through an empty machine. This is not science fiction. This is the reality of what happens when the soul withdraws. The person doesn't disappear physically, they disappear spiritually. And they often become more outwardly successful, more praised, more elevated in positions of power, because they are easy to mold, easy to control. They no longer carry the unpredictability of spirit, the fire of self-inquiry, the weight of conscience. They fit perfectly into systems that reward obedience over awareness. And the more shells a society produces, the easier it becomes to shape the collective will into something soulless, mechanical, and compliant. But there is a deeper sorrow in all of this, because many of these people were once vibrant, curious, sensitive. Somewhere, deep in their past, there was a child who felt the presence of the sacred, who asked big questions, who looked at the stars, and sensed that they were part of something eternal. But life, pain, and culture crushed that wonder, taught them to doubt, taught them to conform, taught them that their inner knowing was not real, not valuable, not safe. And so, piece by piece, they traded their soul for survival. And now, they don't even remember what they lost. This is not about condemnation, it's about understanding. The soulless are not monsters. They are mirrors, reminding us of what happens when we turn away from the light inside us. They show us what we could become if we stop choosing to feel, to think, to listen. They reveal the cost of spiritual neglect, and in doing so, they call us, not to judge them, but to protect what they lost. Because here's the truth: the soul, when neglected long enough, does not scream, it whispers, and if unheard, it becomes silent. And if that silence goes on too long, it disappears. Not into death, but into dormancy so deep, it may never rise again. That is the ultimate tragedy, not that these people do harm, but that they once held the potential for divinity and let it slip away unnoticed. If you've ever felt yourself slipping into numbness, if you've ever caught yourself acting in ways that feel disconnected from who you are, if you've ever feared that your heart is growing quieter each day, know this: you are not beyond saving, but you must act. You must return, not to some external belief system, but to the flame inside you. Fan it, feed it, protect it with everything you have. Because once that flame is gone, your body may keep moving, but your life will not be your own. And for those already too far gone, all you can do is recognize what they are and what they're not. You cannot awaken a soul that no longer resides in the body. You cannot teach truth to a system that is no longer designed to feel it, but you can guard your own light. You can stay awake. You can refuse to be programmed, no matter how convincing the world becomes. The disconnected walk among us, not as villains, but as warnings. They show us what happens when we forget the sacred, when we choose numbness over truth, when we abandon the soul for comfort, status, or survival. And while they may not know what they've become, you still do. So, choose differently, choose awareness, choose depth, choose the soul, before it, too, decides to leave. Are you absolutely certain your soul is fully activated? Not just the idea of it, not just the language you've picked up about energy, purpose, and higher self, but the actual connection, felt, lived, embodied. Because here's the uncomfortable truth: you can believe in spirituality, talk about consciousness, read every sacred book, and still be drifting quietly into spiritual sleep. You can look awake and still be operating from the shell. The descent doesn't always happen with drama. In fact, that's what makes it so dangerous. It's subtle. It creeps in slowly, like fog rolling in over warm ground. At first, you don't notice. You're busy. Life moves fast. The routines are familiar. You start saying things like, "I'll meditate later," or "I just need to get through this week." You begin trading presence for productivity, stillness for stimulation, soulfulness for surface survival. And the worst part? It feels normal, like this is just how life island, but deep down, something knows. Something whispers, this isn't it. Spiritual disconnection doesn't mean you're bad, it doesn't mean you've failed, but it does mean you're in danger, because when your soul starts to dim, you don't feel it as darkness, you feel it as numbness. Your joy becomes muted, your decisions feel hollow, your days blur together, You start living in reaction instead of creation, and slowly, silently, you begin to resemble the very thing you once feared becoming, a shell. So let's be honest. Are you at risk? Start with your mornings. Do you wake up with intention, or do you reach for your phone before your first breath of awareness? Are your thoughts guided by inner clarity, or pulled instantly into notifications, messages, and noise? If the first thing you encounter every day is distraction, how can your soul possibly lead? Then look at your relationships. Are they soul-nourishing or soul-draining? Do the people in your life see you, really see you, or are you performing a role they've come to expect? Are you giving your energy to places where your presence is taken for granted? You can be surrounded by people and still be starving for real connection. And if you keep giving away your presence to the wrong places, eventually, even yourself begins to forget who you are. Examine your emotions. Have you been feeling dulled? Not deeply sad, not obviously lost, just slightly detached from everything? That low-grade emptiness that hovers just beneath the surface, that's not your personality. That's your soul waving a quiet red flag. And when you ignore it long enough, you stop hearing it altogether. Here's a deeper question. When was the last time you felt sacred silence inside you? Not just calm, but that ancient, holy stillness where something greater moves through you. If it's been a while, don't shame yourself, just recognize it. Because when your soul is activated, you remember. You feel things more vividly. Beauty hits harder. Time slows down. Your intuition sharpens. You stop chasing, and you begin listening again. But if you can't remember the last time you felt that, you may already be halfway down the path of forgetting. And forgetting is how it always begins. You forget your rituals. You forget your inner voice. You forget what it feels like to move through life with sacred intent. You start living through the surface layers, the roles, the tasks, the scrolling, the reacting. And with each passing week, your inner fire dims. You still smile, you still function. But the light behind your eyes changes. It's not dramatic, but it's real. You start compromising. Little things at first. You say yes when your soul says no. You ignore that subtle warning in your gut. You stop saying what you really mean. And slowly, without realizing it, you start building a life that fits your image, not your essence. That's when the shell begins to form. And the longer you live in it, the harder it becomes to find your way out. But here's the terrifying part. People can live like this for decades and never realize it. Because the world rewards the shell. It praises productivity, not presence. It celebrates polished words over authentic silence. It elevates performance, not depth. So you might rise in status, grow in popularity, even build a reputation for being spiritual, and yet be completely disconnected from your own soul. The outer world will never warn you. It will never say, "Hey, you've gone numb." It will say, "You're doing great." That's why this checkpoint is crucial, because no one else can do it for you. Only you can stop and ask, am I alive, or am I just performing life? Am I present, or am I pretending? Am I connected to something sacred, or have I confused momentum for meaning? If you're feeling lost right now, good, it means something in you is still aware. The real danger isn't being lost, it's not knowing you're lost. It's moving so fast, so habitually, that you stop feeling anything at all. The soul is not loud. It doesn't scream to get your attention. It whispers. It waits. And if you ignore it long enough, it stops speaking. Not out of punishment, but because you stopped listening. So, pause. Right now. Feel into your own body. Is there tension? Are your thoughts racing? Is there any part of you that feels like it's been waiting for this very moment to be seen again? Good. That's your access point. That's your portal back to the real. Don't run from this. Don't tell yourself you'll come back to it later. Because later becomes never. And every moment you delay is another step toward the shell. This is not about fear. It's about responsibility. You were given a soul, not just to carry, but to live through. And if you don't nurture it, feed it, listen to it, it will recede. Not because it wants to, but because this world has no space for it unless you make that space. If you've been feeling disconnected, ask yourself, what am I consuming? What am I repeating? Who am I becoming? And most importantly, Why am I avoiding my own silence? Because silence is where the soul speaks. And if you can't bear silence, it's likely because your soul has been trying to tell you something you don't want to hear. Not to shame you, but to wake you. You're not here to drift. You're not here to become another face in the crowd. You're not here to trade your light for likes, or your truth for validation. You're here to remember, to feel the sacred burn of being alive, to act from your depths, to speak from your knowing, to walk as one who carries fire. But the fire cannot walk for you. You must choose to carry it. You must protect it from the winds of distraction. You must tend to it daily, and you must be willing to let it burn away everything you are not. Because the truth is, you're always moving in one of two directions, deeper into soul, or closer to shell. There is no standing still. So ask yourself, right here, right now, which way am I going? And if the answer shakes you, don't turn away. Turn inward. There is a war happening right now, but it's not fought with weapons or on battlefields. It is fought in the quiet moments of decision, in the invisible realms of thought, perception, and vibration. It is not between nations or ideologies. It is between awareness and unconsciousness, between those who have awakened to the sacred truth of existence and those who sleepwalk through life, driven not by spirit but by programming. And the most unsettling part of this war is that most don't even realize it's happening. They go to work, they scroll their screens, they make small talk, all while the soul within them either rises into its divine inheritance or slips deeper into the grip of spiritual amnesia. This is not metaphor. This is the reality behind the chaos you feel, the heaviness you carry, the pressure that builds around those who dare to ask real questions. The world is at a tipping point, not politically or economically, but spiritually. There are forces in this realm and beyond it that thrive on slumber, forces that do not want you to wake up, because to awaken is to see through illusion. To awaken is to reclaim sovereignty. To awaken is to remember that you are not a pawn in their systems, not a product of your trauma, not a number on a screen, but a divine being, encoded with infinite potential. And yet, most live as if they've forgotten this truth. The human shells we've spoken about are not just passive. They have become active agents in this war, not through malice, but through manipulation. These are the individuals who unconsciously enforce the rules of the dream. They reinforce the narrative, not because they've questioned it and chosen it, but because they've absorbed it without resistance. Their souls are either buried beneath layers of false identity or have withdrawn entirely. And in this vacant state, they become carriers of suppression. They mock what they do not understand. They shame what they cannot feel. They police what they fear in themselves. These are not enemies in the traditional sense. They are conduits, mouthpieces for a collective unconscious that seeks to protect its illusions at all costs. You may have felt it already. That strange tension when you speak your truth and someone reacts with disproportionate rage. That heaviness when you walk into a space and feel drained without explanation. That moment when your clarity begins to blur around people who seem kind on the surface, yet leave you feeling disoriented and diminished. These are not coincidences. Awakened souls radiate a frequency that unsettles the sleepwalking masses, not because it is harmful, but because it is disruptive. Your presence reminds them, consciously or not, of everything they've abandoned within themselves. And that remembrance is terrifying. So they attack, not always with words, sometimes just with energy, a look, a subtle undermining, a passive-aggressive comment, a sudden withdrawal of affection. It's not always obvious, but it is always felt. Because when you awaken, you are no longer invisible to the forces that feed on unconsciousness. You shine too brightly. You become a glitch in their matrix, a reminder that the system is not complete. And those who remain plugged into that system, knowingly or not, will feel an urge to suppress you, not out of hatred, but out of energetic discomfort. Your very existence challenges their programming. There is a reason that many awakened beings feel isolated, misunderstood, even targeted. It's not paranoia, it's perception. The higher your frequency, the more you illuminate what others are trying to avoid. You don't even have to speak. Your presence is a mirror. And for those who have forgotten their reflection, that mirror becomes unbearable. So they distance themselves. Or they try to pull you back into their sleep, into their drama, into their narrative. Because if they can't rise to meet your frequency, they'll try to lower yours to meet theirs. But here's the truth that cannot be erased. This war is not eternal. It is building towards something. Many spiritual traditions speak of a time when the separation between the asleep and the awake would become undeniable, when the veil would thin, when the frequency of Earth itself would rise, forcing everything hidden to be revealed. Gnostic teachings called this the unveiling, the moment when the false rulers of this world, the archons of illusion, would lose their grip as humanity began to remember its divine origin. Theosophical writings echoed this prophecy, describing a great awakening that would not come through institutions or leaders, but through individual souls igniting all over the planet, like stars catching fire in the night. And you, whether you realize it yet or not, are one of those stars. This is not about superiority, it's about responsibility. You are not here to convert, to debate, or to fight the sleepers. You are here to anchor a new frequency, to hold your light so steadily, so unapologetically, that those who are ready to awaken can find their way by it. But that means you must stop shrinking. You must stop explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. You must stop dimming your truth to protect the comfort of those still lost in their own forgetting. Because every time you do, the war gains another inch. And this war is not won through force. It is won through resonance, through alignment, through the quiet, powerful act of refusing to abandon yourself, no matter how loud the world becomes. The real battle is not external, it is inside you, every day. Will you choose numbness or awareness? Will you react from ego or respond from essence? Will you fall back into the hypnosis of fear, or will you stand in the clarity of your soul, even when it shakes you to the core? There will be moments when it feels easier to go back to sleep, when the weight of being awake feels too heavy, when you long for the simplicity of ignorance. But don't. Because what you're feeling is not weakness, it's the resistance of a world still learning how to carry the frequency you now hold. And your strength is not in perfection, it is in persistence. In your refusal to abandon the truth, even when it costs you relationships, comfort, or certainty. And yes, the pressure will increase. The systems of illusion will scream louder as they begin to collapse. The shells will grow more agitated, more erratic. But that is not a sign of your failure. It is a sign of their ending. Because, when the light becomes too strong, the darkness no longer hides, it panics. And in that panic, it reveals itself. Let that be your signal. You were not made for comfort. You were made for remembrance. You are not here to be accepted. You are here to awaken. And in doing so, you will awaken others, not by force, but by flame. Not by answers, but by presence. You are the living prophecy, whether you believe it yet or not. And while the sleepers may outnumber you, they do not outweigh you. Because the soul, once ignited, holds the force of eternity. And no matter how vast the illusion becomes, it only takes one spark to set the truth ablaze. What if I told you that everything you're seeking, peace, purpose, connection, clarity, is already within you, not hidden, not locked away, but simply forgotten beneath layers of noise and false identity? You don't need to become someone new, you don't need to earn your worth, you only need to remember who you already are. But remembering doesn't happen by accident, and the longer you live in disconnection, the harder it becomes to hear the quiet voice of your soul. That's why this moment matters more than you realize. Because if you don't reclaim your soul now, while it's still whispering, you may reach a point where its voice fades completely. Your soul doesn't scream, it doesn't demand, it won't compete with your distractions or beg for your attention. It waits in the quiet, beneath your thoughts, beneath your compulsions, beneath the version of yourself that you project to the world. It waits with infinite patience, but not infinite presence. You can lose touch with it. You can move so far into performance, comparison, and unconscious survival that the spark dims, not because it's gone forever, but because you stopped facing it. And eventually, if untended, the soul recedes, not out of cruelty, but because it cannot live in a space where truth is no longer welcome. To reclaim it, you must be willing to let go of everything false. You must be willing to die, not physically, but spiritually, to everything you thought you were. The mind will resist this. It will try to understand your soul through thought, through logic, through theories and language. But the soul cannot be grasped through thinking. It is not an idea, it is a presence, and it only responds to what is real. This is why the journey back to your essence begins not with knowledge, but with stillness. Stillness is not simply the absence of noise. It is the return to your natural state. In stillness, you become receptive. You begin to feel the difference between what is yours and what was placed upon you. You start to notice how much of your life is being lived from habit rather than choice. And from that awareness, something sacred awakens, a subtle warmth, a pulse, a flicker of remembrance that begins to expand. Make space for this stillness daily, not as an obligation, but as a sacred offering. Create a container in your life where nothing is expected of you, no roles to play, no answers to give. Just your breath, your presence, and your willingness to feel. It may be uncomfortable at first, the mind will fidget, old emotions may rise, but this is how you cleanse the inner vessel. You let what's buried come up, you feel it fully, and then you release it, not by force, but by allowing. As the stillness deepens, so does the call to inquire. Inner inquiry is not about analyzing yourself, it's about remembering yourself. It means asking the questions that pierce through illusion. Who am I beneath my beliefs? What is moving me when no one is watching? What do I serve in the silence of my heart? Don't seek perfect answers. Seek honest ones. Because honesty is the language of the soul. And this honesty leads you directly to devotion. Not devotion in the religious sense, but in the spiritual sense. Devotion to truth. Devotion to presence. Devotion to something greater than your ego. When you live with devotion, your life becomes an offering. Your actions carry weight. Your energy becomes sacred. You stop chasing experiences and start creating resonance. You become a living temple, and in that space, your soul thrives. But devotion without service is incomplete, because the soul does not awaken only for itself, it awakens to serve, to uplift, to heal, to bridge heaven and earth through the vessel of your being. When you begin to serve from the soul, you don't need recognition, you don't need to be understood, you act from a place so pure that even the smallest gesture becomes holy. That is the frequency that changes lives, not flashy displays, but quiet, unwavering presence. You may be wondering, where does all of this lead? What does it mean to reclaim the soul? In the ancient teachings, there are 3 higher principles within every human, 3 luminous aspects that reflect your divine nature. They are called manas, buddhi, and atma. Manas is the higher mind, not your logical, calculating intellect, but the spacious, intuitive mind that sees patterns beyond time. When manas awakens, your thinking becomes aligned with purpose. You begin to think with your soul, rather than around it. Ideas come through you, not from you. Your intuition sharpens, your vision clarifies, and mental clutter begins to dissolve. Buddhi is the light of intuition and discernment. It is the silent wisdom that knows without needing to prove. Buddhi sees through masks, it speaks in symbols. It guides you not with fear, but with knowing. When Buddhi is active, you stop needing constant validation from the world. You become your own compass, your own oracle. You trust your inner yes, and you honor your sacred no. Atma is the spirit itself, the divine spark that links you to the infinite source. It is not a part of you, it is you, in your highest essence. When you begin to reconnect with Atma, you feel an indescribable remembrance. A sense that you are not separate, not lost, not broken, but part of something ancient, luminous, and eternal. Atma is not an experience, it is a state of being that transcends fear, that watches the world from stillness, that loves without needing, that is, without effort. To awaken these principles is not to achieve something, it is to return to who you have always been beneath the noise. And that return is not accomplished through more information, it happens through integration, through practice, through daily choices that reflect your inner truth rather than your outer conditioning. So, begin today. Not with a grand ritual, but with a sincere moment. Light a candle, sit in silence. Place your hand over your heart and ask, am I living from soul, or am I performing a version of myself for the world? Listen without judgment. The answer may humble you, but it will also free you. Speak less, listen more, move slower, breathe deeper, Create from intention, not impulse. And above all, stop outsourcing your spiritual life to others. You are not here to copy someone else's awakening. You are here to live your own. Let devotion become your discipline. Let stillness become your sanctuary. Let service become your strength. And let truth become your teacher. Because at the end of this life, you won't be asked what you achieved. You'll be asked what you remembered. Did you remember your soul? Did you live in alignment with what was sacred within you? Or did you trade it all for convenience, comfort, and control? You still have time, but not forever. The longer you wait, the harder it becomes to hear the call. The world will keep pulling at you, keep tempting you with noise, with performance, with distraction. But you don't have to answer. You can choose something different. And if you do, if you reclaim your soul and walk with it lit from within, you won't need to say a word. Your presence will say everything. So ask yourself now, before it's too late, will I walk as a vessel of truth, or will I remain a well-dressed echo? Only one path leads you home. There comes a moment in every soul's journey when the external world grows too loud, too chaotic, too false to ignore any longer. A moment when the glitter of illusion no longer dazzles, when the applause of the crowd no longer satisfies, when the empty repetitions of daily life feel like echoes in a hollow chamber. That moment is not a breakdown. It is a summons, a sacred turning point, and it comes for everyone, eventually, including you, right now, because whether you realize it or not, you are standing at a threshold. On one side, the comfort of numbness, distraction, and surface-level survival. On the other, the raw, holy fire of awakening. And you must choose. You cannot remain in between forever. The soul does not thrive in limbo. There is no neutral path anymore. You are either becoming more conscious, more soul-aware, more rooted in truth, or you are becoming more hollow, more programmable, more detached from what makes you you. Every choice you make nudges you in one direction or the other. Every time you listen to that quiet inner voice, even when it contradicts logic or expectation, you add strength to your flame. Every time you betray that voice to please the world or avoid discomfort, the flame dims. This is not philosophical, it is vibrational. Your energy is either refining or degrading. There is no pause button on evolution. The ancient mystics understood this. The Gnostics taught that the world was a stage of forgetting, filled with distractions and deceptions designed to pull you away from your true origin. But they also taught that within you lives a spark from the divine source itself, a seed of remembrance that no darkness can fully extinguish. Theosophical teachings echoed this, describing the human being as a sacred vessel, capable of immense transformation, but only if they choose to wake up. And this awakening is not automatic. It must be claimed, it must be fought for, not with violence, but with vigilance, not with belief, but with direct inner experience. You've already seen what happens to those who refuse the call. They become shells, perfect replicas of life, devoid of spirit. Their words become recycled scripts, their joy becomes performative. Their relationships become transactions. They may look successful, they may be admired, but look deeper. There is no depth behind their eyes, no resonance in their presence. They have traded their flame for an image, and worst of all, they no longer even remember what they lost. Do not become one of them. You may think you're not ready, that you need more time. That awakening is for some later phase of life, when things calm down or make more sense. But that is the great lie. There is no better moment than now. The world will never hand you a perfect invitation. Your soul is the invitation, and it is already calling. Every discomfort you feel, every sense that something is missing, every night you lie awake feeling disconnected from the world around you, it is not a problem to fix. It is a signal to answer. You do not need to become someone else. You need to return to who you've always been, beneath the layers, beneath the trauma, beneath the masks, beneath the fear. That pure, eternal self is not lost. It's waiting, watching, hoping you'll finally stop chasing shadows and turn inward, because in that turning, everything changes. Not all at once, not without struggle. But with each moment of awareness, the soul reclaims its throne. And you begin to live not from programming, but from presence. Not from expectation, but from essence. But make no mistake, there is a cost to this path. You will lose illusions. You will be misunderstood. You will shed parts of your life that once gave you comfort, and yet, in their place, you will gain something far more precious: clarity, integrity, peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, joy that doesn't require an audience, love that doesn't come with conditions. This is what it means to truly awaken, not to escape the world, but to walk through it as a living embodiment of truth. And the world needs that now more than ever. We are surrounded by noise masquerading as wisdom, by influence mistaken for insight, by avatars of truth who have forgotten the taste of silence. In this landscape, your soul becomes a lighthouse, not for show, not for status, but for those still lost in the fog. Your awakening is not selfish, it is service, the most powerful kind. Because when you remember who you are, you help others remember too, not with words, but with frequency. So I ask you, directly, will you remain on the surface, or will you dive inward? Will you continue to perform, or will you begin to be? Will you sleepwalk through a life designed by others, or will you carve your path from the fire of your own knowing? This is not a question you can answer casually. Your entire future depends on it. Because one path leads to expansion, the other to contraction. One to the light of your own divinity, the other to a slow erosion into emptiness. You cannot walk both. You cannot stay halfway. Not anymore. You have heard the whispers. You've felt the pull. You've known, deep down, that there is more to you than what you've been told. That feeling is not imagination. It is your soul, knocking. The question is, will you answer before the knocking stops? No one else can make this decision for you. No guru, no teacher, no partner. This is a sacred contract between you and the infinite, and it begins with a single vow: I will not abandon myself, not for approval, not for comfort, not for anything. Protect your inner flame at all costs. Guard it like the sacred treasure it island. Feed it with truth, fuel it with stillness, trust it when everything else feels uncertain. Because in the end, when all illusions collapse, the only thing that will matter is whether your soul is awake or asleep. You are not here to mimic life. You are here to embody it. You are not here to conform. You are here to transform. And that transformation begins with one choice: awaken or hollow. The time to choose is not tomorrow. It is not next year. It is not once the world gets easier. It is now. Because every moment you wait, a little more of you fades, and every moment you choose, a little more of you returns. So choose. Choose with your whole being, and let that choice set your soul on fire.